Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. There was so much in Trump's State of the Union address that deserves our scorn. But it was this moment that may well go down in history as the flashing red warning light of an impending constitutional crisis.
So despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful, country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in, peace-protecting. Many of the wars I settled was because of the threat of tariffs. I wouldn't have been able to settle them without. Will remain in place under fully approved and tested alternative legal statutes. And they have been tested for a long time. They're a little more complex, but they're actually probably better, leading to a solution that will be even stronger than before. Congressional action will not be necessary. It's already time tested and approved.
Donald Trump has zero respect for the separation of powers, which means he has zero regard for the Constitution itself. When the Supreme Court struck down his tariffs as unconstitutional, Trump immediately condemned the justices voting in the majority and set about finding ways to circumvent their ruling. And here you have the clearest visual representation of that confrontation. A solitary potentate staring down, literally looking down on the Supreme Court justices who tried to check his power. We have approached many Rubicons already. In Trump's second term, he has tried and continues to try to politicize the military, to weaponize the judiciary, the list goes on. But the ultimate Rubicon will be when he openly and brazenly defies a ruling by the Supreme Court. That is coming, and it will be a full-blown constitutional crisis. I attended a meeting last week of the Bolch Judicial Institute, a gathering of jurists and legal scholars who spent some time wrestling with this very question. I had the honor of interviewing recently retired federal judge Paul Grimm, who has rededicated himself in retirement to educating Americans about just how important it is to maintain and uphold the independence of the judiciary. My full interview with Judge Grimm is on my Substack page. That link is below. Here's an excerpt where we talk about the attempts by the Trump administration to undermine judicial independence and about the judiciary's need to maintain the public trust, because ultimately, without its own army or the power of the purse, that trust is the court's only real source of power. Here's our conversation. Maybe the only thing more threatening to that system of checks and balances than the attempt by the other branches to politicize the courts is the growing sense that the courts actually have no teeth. When you look at the fact that Reuters just reported that there are over 4,400 illegal detentions by ICE and no significant attempt to remedy that, 89 violations of court orders. On one hand, that is an absolute indictment of the executive branch and its disregard for not just constitutional norms, but the law. But it is an even greater indictment of the fundamental weakness of the judicial branch. How do you reckon with the removal of the veil that, as Jackson said, let them enforce it? You have no army.
Well, there's no question, the Federalist Papers, that Hamilton said that the judiciary was the weakest branch. It had neither the power of the purse or the sword. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to imagine that, or the difficult thing to imagine that if a court says, no, you can't do it this way, that violates the Constitution or a statute, that there's going to be pushback. There has always been pushback, and there have always been instances in which there may be lip service paid to complying with a court order that wasn't really followed up with, or there have been a grumbling or attacks, or even during the Jeffersonian his tenure as president, that they tried for political reasons to impeach Justice Chase because they disagreed with his rulings in favor of the Federalist agenda. He was impeached, and it took the courage of 6 Jeffersonian senators to say, no, we're not going to vote for impeachment here because that would be wrong. There has been a tradition and there have been norms that you had to comply with court orders. And yet at the time when there can be slow walking compliance or a absolute disregard, the only way that the system itself has for dealing with that is to go through the system itself with contempt proceedings. The hope is that oftentimes what you hear people say is that, well, if it's a lower trial court, then, on appeal, it may be set aside. But what folks need to understand, which is why court orders should be followed and complied with, is that the system has a self-protecting environment to it. When a trial court makes a ruling, there are appellate courts, and there's ultimately the Supreme Court. We have, thus far, not seen an example of the Supreme Court conclusively ruling on the merits of a case and saying, this is the ruling, where there has been a disregard about it. And I think that you have to build from that hope that what you need to do is you need to let sometimes the system absorb some of the hits and to keep going till you get to the point where you have that final judgment. It's probably the most fragile aspect of our democracy and the most fragile arm of the separation of powers. And we just have to have faith that ultimately, even if there is an instance where someone flatly disregards a final order by, for example, the Supreme Court, that the public itself will come to see the danger of that happening.
Let's talk about that, because that is why ultimately we're here. The ultimate check of executive power, and to a lesser degree Article I power, is the public, while we remain a democracy. But a public that doesn't understand the value of the courts or the role it plays cannot offer that kind of support.
What we have to do is we have to turn to folks who can explain the message about why courts are important. And that's something that retired judges can do, because they understand the way the system works, and they can participate in programs to say, well, why shouldn't you just be able to impeach a judge? If you don't like it, well, why not? Why not do that? And explain why it's important that not happen.
It's Ken with a quick break to tell you about my Substack page, where you'll find bonus episodes and other exclusive content. And subscribing is a way to support this show directly without us having to rely on advertisers. For those of you who have signed up, thank you so much. It is growing harder and harder to rely on traditional media. Just look at what has happened over at CBS. So independent news is going to have to make up the gap. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here in the interviews and the commentary that this show brings you, please consider pitching in. It's free to sign up, and that itself is helpful because popular shows get recommended even more people. And if you're able to afford a paid subscription, they start at $8 a month. Every dollar goes back into what we're doing. Thanks for helping out.
But ordinary people talking about how, they were about to lose their house. And a court heard their case and prevented the foreclosure from occurring because it wasn't done in accordance with the law. About someone who was not getting their child support, and they almost lost their children because they could not take care of it. About